So I am here, greetings everybody, I'm here with Sylvia Megret, who's with ACDI VOCA. She's the Chief Operating Officer. And one of the delights for me has been that when I started interviewing leaders, and Sylvia has been very instrumental in my thinking, and it was also Sylvia who started me thinking about particularly the challenges and the joys of women leaders in the global development sector. So I'm super happy to have you here, Sylvia.
Thank you.
And let's just start out with, tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are now.
I've always had a passion for international development, but it really started when I had got my degree from American University in 1992 with my master's degree. Although throughout my academic career, learning and trying to understand the challenges facing international development was something that was very compelling to me. I can't exactly tell you that I set out a path to where I am right now. And in fact, my path was in part led by so many people who helped guide me or give me opportunities that kind of, in many ways, with serendipity, ended up being, where I am. I felt so privileged to be able to serve as interim CEO and president of ACDI VOCA and now COO, because one of the great things is that I have the ability to I have the privilege to be working with people who are just as passionate as I am about improving the lives of people, empowering people to live and succeed in a global economy, and achieving better lives through economic prosperity, through social inclusion, and all of the elements we work in. So in some ways it's been just growth through my career. I know I've wanted to be in a mission-driven sector, and I had a lot of people help me along the way.
So for you right now in your current position, what are some of the things that bring you joy in your job or in your position?
I have been so lucky to be, as I mentioned, on the receiving end of mentoring relationships with some very, really, really amazing people who have helped me either get a job or be better at my job, or to build a greater network, or to help me break down key career decisions. And one of the great joys I get right now is being able to give back and being able to mentor young professionals, mid-level professionals, and sometimes even others. And I feel that it's, in the beginning, it's like, oh, I can give something back. But in the end, I actually get a lot out of it myself. So I get joy out of having a positive impact on somebody's career, breaking down a problem, trying to find different solutions, helping them discover resources that they didn't know existed. So to me, that is really, it's profoundly meaningful to be able to do that. Recently somebody got in touch with me, actually a young man, maybe he's not a young man anymore, but we worked together, we're well over a decade ago. And he sent me a note and he said, I was having a really complex problem at work, and I tried to break it down, and I thought about some advice you gave me 10 years ago, and I used that to help me figure out where to go. And I just wanted to say, I don't know if I ever thanked you. And I was just so appreciative that that even maybe a little bit nugget of information could help. I love watching people's careers grow here at ACDI VOCA, but in other places, watching people stay with the organization for a long period of time, and as a result grow in their careers like I've had the chance to do is really what gives me. Obviously, I get enormous joy out of working with the beneficiaries on the ground, meeting with our staff, but one key thing is about working with our professionals, both men and women.
And so when you told me actually at one point that somebody was your mentor that he didn't I think you said he didn't know that he was your mentor. And so there's that kind of mentor where you put yourself with someone, or you stick close to someone who you can learn from. And how have you, what has been your experience in yourself in getting mentors? Because that's a thing people can be difficult.
Sure, sure. Not everybody has time, right? I remember early on in my career, I spent a lot of time helping people get their resumes and getting out there at the job. And I would often spend a lot of time with somebody, and they'd say, wow, they'd come in for an informational interview, and I'd end up spending 45 minutes helping them rethink how they're presenting themselves. And they'd say, wow, I can't believe you just spent 45 minutes with me. And I suppose just pay it forward and make sure that you do that. To me, you have to cultivate your mentors. People, a mentor isn't just going to go in many cases and isn't going to go find a successful potential professional and say, hey, let me be your mentor. And I think it's about finding people who you think you can learn something from. I've had the experience where people have come to me and said, will you mentor me? I'm having a problem in X, Y, and Z. Or other people who just regularly pop by my office and say, I have a problem, and so it's not as much of a formal relationship. But it is as much on the mentee to kind of identify people and say, I'm trying to soak up some of your guidance. The reality is when you ask somebody their opinion, most people, or their guidance, most people feel like that's a privilege, not a burden. So it's about how do you go about doing that, and of course using people's time wisely. But most of the people I found who've entered in those relationships, understand that value.
So there's something else there also about knowing what you need, asking for it, being assertive, knowing that you're worthy. I'm thinking of young women, knowing that you're worthy to be mentored, right?
Right.
To see that worth in you.
Sure.
And yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people, struggle with, and that's confidence, and realizing that they, like you said, that they are worthy, and figuring out what's important to them, and what can I change, and what can't I change, and where can I go get help and elicit somebody's feedback. But you have to be willing to accept it as well. And yeah, and that's not always easy. If you are authentically asking for feedback, you have to authentically be able to at least ponder what the recommendations are, and that's about searching in yourself and saying, okay, I can see where I could do this a little bit differently, and let me try that. And I think it goes back to some of the things that we've spoken about is failure, and is failure really a bad thing? And if not, why not? And how do we be okay with not always being 100%?
So let's talk about failure. So is failure always a bad thing, and how can we be okay with not having it be 100% correct?
I think that failure is absolutely key to success. I think that if you can't learn, then you're not going to move forward. And to think that you only learn by being successful, I think is a fallacy. I think that accepting failure, doesn't mean I accept repeated failure. We need to address that. Don't get me wrong. But I think if you think about how you learn in life, you don't learn to walk by just standing up one day and walking. And so we have to be able to figure out when to give people the leeway to fail, and how to give ourselves that leeway. I remember having a conversation it was a dinner conversation. It was a business dinner. And I remember telling this gentleman, it was an Australian gentleman, that my daughter was about to go to college in a couple years. And I was really worried that she had not really failed at anything. And he was actually, I mean, he was nearly apoplectic. Like, what do you mean you want your child to fail? And again, like I said, you know, failure is really less about the act of failing than it is about how you react to that failure and how you recover from that failure. I think, you know, we've all heard, you know, that whole adage, leadership isn't a position or a title, it's a journey. But I actually think that leadership is an act, it's an example. And I have failed many times, made decisions that then I'd had to readjust. But I think helping people understand that that's okay, as long as it is how they react and they readjust, that's important. I think when you're younger, success in your career is about, you know, getting ahead, building yourself up, learning new skills, you know, getting that promotion and promoting yourself. And I think when you get to a leadership level, your role is about helping other people and promoting other people, and they as the center, not you. And so I think that, you know, successful leaders need to be able to help people recover from failure. You know, if you can't recover from failure, you're not resilient. And if you're not resilient, you're going to have a hard time getting to the next level or being able to survive, you know, organizationally, you know, big challenges.
Because as a leader, listening to you talk, I have this image that you're failing in front of people all day long. I mean, maybe not all day long, but you're making decisions, some of them work, some of them don't. And there's lots of people watching. There's no place to hide.
Yeah. That is right. You have to, it takes, I think it was a conversation you and I had earlier about, you know, courage. And how do you summon that up, and you know, what does it look like, and you know, how do you have the courage to speak, you know, to speak truth to power, and how do you make sure that when you do it, you say it in a way that you can be heard? Because it isn't just what you're saying. A lot of people think they can speak the truth because their truth is the right truth. But if you can't speak your truth to power in a way that it can be heard, you're not going to be, you know, effective. You know, the same thing with making decisions. I mean, in the end, leadership is responsible for the decisions that are taken, and they have to hold that responsibility very carefully. And I think the key to that is, when making difficult decisions, because that's the job of leadership, it's critical to do it with empathy and transparency. And if you don't have those things, I think you have a greater or higher risk of failure. I think that links back to vulnerability, and whether or not, as a leader, is it okay to be vulnerable? I remember I had a boss many years ago, and we would go into meetings in the first 6 months. She was very senior. And on several occasions, she would say, well, I don't understand this topic, or I'm completely lost. I really don't understand what's going on. And I thought, oh my God, she's revealing a weakness. Oh boy, oh boy, I don't know about this. And then I looked and I watched over time, and I realized that that's not at all what was happening. She was showing that she's authentic. She was showing that she's not infallible. And I think as a result of that, that ability to be vulnerable in a series of circumstances, that, she actually gained the trust and the respect of the colleagues throughout the organization. So I found that really, that was something I watched over a period of my career, and I learned so much from that.
And to link that back to courage, it takes courage to do that.
Yeah.
To say, I don't know, I'm getting lost, or that's a subject I don't know very much about, or
yeah,
it takes courage to be that vulnerable and that authentic.
Yeah. No, I think so. But I think part of being authentic and vulnerable in a leadership role is also, believe it or not, forgiveness, which doesn't mean tolerance for repetitive errors, but forgiveness means, I see you've stumbled. I see we've gone, you've gone or we've gone this way, and now we need to readjust, or we need to react, or we need to respond in a way that we can recover. But I can be seen as somebody who has to redirect my decisions, and people are more accepting of that when they know that a culture of forgiveness is also going to help us move forward. I think that forgiveness may sound like kind of a soft, girly word, but I think that the impact on corporate culture of a leadership that is forgiving is one that breeds trust and belief in the authenticity. So in the end, somebody said something to me a while back, well, you came to this meeting and you're really important. And I just looked at this person. I said, we all get up every morning and put our pants on the same way, one leg at a time. And they were a little taken aback, but I think that people, we're all here to move forward as an organization. And if we can allow kind of that authentic approach, the ability to demonstrate our vulnerability, that we're infallible, I think that overall, as leaders, we can make an organization that's more resilient. And to me, that's the goal, because it's never going to be perfect. We're always going to have shocks or changes of some kind. And we have to learn how to respond to those.
I've not heard, this is the first time somebody's raised forgiveness. I think people talk about it a different way, and I'm liking it. It's it's not saying you can act, your output is whatever and we just accept it. It's still holding standards and holding.
Absolutely.
And I like the thinking that we're just human. We are all trying to do our best. And it fits in so nicely with failure, because
yeah,
I'm going to make mistakes, you're going to make mistakes, and how do we? I would think that if we have a culture of forgiveness, that it would be easier to rebound and have that resilience.
Right. And I think that's new. I mean, I think that one of the things that we were talking about at another conversation is, how should leadership, or how does leadership need to change or evolve over time? Yeah. And I think that there's been in the past this image of leadership as infallible, perfect. They have the right answers at the right time. They come in, this is what we're going to do, and we're all going to go this way. And I think that what happens is, over time, the stress of having to live and be that perfect superhero, the real human comes out one day. And when they do, they're either come out burnt out, or with such gaps when they leave an organization that it's hard to recover from. So I think we need a new leadership style, that embraces vulnerability, and that cares about humility and respect and transparency, and that we it's interesting. When I was a lot younger, there was a perfume. There was a perfume ad that had a professional woman in the 70s, and it had a great little song that we all sang, was you bring home the bacon and you fry it up in the pan. And there was an image, I think, in a lot of people's careers, at least my age, you've got to do everything. You have to be able to take care of the people you need to at home, and you have to take care of your family, you have to take care of your coworkers and yourself and succeed. And I think that that's not possible. And that's maybe not a popular thing to say, but I think we have to decide what we can and what we can't do, and to be willing to say, I can't do it all, and these are the places I need help because I don't have the answers. I need you to help me. So anyway, that's just my thinking on it.
And just for my own, the way my own self is, and I see this in other people too, is there's a perfectionism, not in, all my documents go out error-free. Right. But a perfectionism, or maybe it's hyperachieving. I will accomplish all these things and I'll do them all perfectly well.
Right.
And that's killing us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that you're describing is such a softer leadership. Vulnerability, humility, respect, transparency. It feels softer to me. In a good way.
Yeah, and but I don't think that means that women in leadership can do those things make them weaker, because vulnerability does not equal weakness. But that's not, but I think that's kind of the old way of thinking about things. But I think you can be clear on your goals, clear on your expectations of yourself and of your teams, of your outputs, and yet create an environment that's trusting, where people can say, I can't do this, but I can do this, and I need help here. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with that, in my opinion.
Because it brings our whole selves, and it's actually realistic about that that's who we are. We're not good at everything.
Right. At least I'm not.
Just you and me, everybody else. Got it. Perfectly managed. So and you think back on yourself, what advice would you give yourself from what you know now? What do you wish that you knew when you were younger?
I think probably some of the things that we hit on. I do think that we need to accept and even celebrate our imperfections and acknowledge them and be transparent about them. That doesn't mean you can say, oh, I'm not doing that part of my job, because I'm not good at that and I don't like that. That's not what that means. It means sitting down and figuring out where you can contribute best and most, and where do you need help, either from your mentors, from your supervisors, from your teammates, or whoever. I mean, I definitely can think back in my career. There were plenty of times where I probably pushed too hard. And it didn't always have, I had to learn from that I didn't always have the right impact, either as it related to my own health, my family's well-being, or my acceptance of others. And so I really wished I'd realized and had been a little bit more forgiving, even with my own self. And I think being able to also know that you can't be all things to all people at all times. And I remember at a time where I had a young family, and I needed to put into place a couple of strategies that worked for me, where I got some help at home, because I knew I was at a point, some things going on, and it never occurred to me that, that was, what I did was really that interesting or important. But I was at a meeting with a bunch of women about my age at that point in time, and we went to have coffee afterwards and pulling their hair out. And I said, well, I brought somebody to come into my house once a week. They cook 2 meals, and they do some of the tasks that I don't have time to do. silly tasks like putting tags on the clothes that I want to sell at the consignment store, you know, and things. And I'd always had a little list, but it was my way, and it was worth, you know, with what I knew that's what I needed, because I couldn't do it all.
And what did they say when you told them?
One of them came back, you know, a year and a half later, and I just thought we were having a conversation about how we're all dealing with. She said, you know, I did what you did. I can't believe how it worked out. And so that was kind of fun. But not everybody can do that for a variety of reasons, but they can figure out, what do you need to do to cover the gaps that aren't going to be covered on your own.
And so I don't know if this is a different question, but are there things that you wish that young women coming up knew now? If you could, you know, they're here listening, what would you want them to know?
I don't know. This is a tough one. I do think it takes patience. You know, a job that I ended up staying with for quite a long time, I thought to myself, oh, you know, I'm only going to stay for 2 years. I changed jobs for a reason. And then 2 years in, I got a promotion. I got some other things. And I kind of put myself in 2 to 3 year intervals. And then I stopped and said, have I grown? Have I changed? Has something different happened? And I know we're all in this fast-paced world where we think everything's going to happen overnight, but you build confidence in yourself and other people's confidence in you, not just by 1 or 2 successes, or even 1 or 2 big successes, which I hope we all have. But it's also through a series of successes and failures where people see, okay, let's invest some more in this person, and let's help move things along. So there's something about being patient with oneself, and knowing you're not going to, you know, wake up at a, you know, 30 and, you know, be CEO of a big organization. I mean, maybe you are. There's certainly some, I'm sure somebody can send me an email with lots of examples of where I'm wrong, but I'm talking about generally in a career there. So I think patience is an important one.
And from what you're saying, it's patience so that people can witness what you're capable of, what you're, you know, successful, and so
right.
A track record. And
I think so, exactly, a track record. I think so many of us have built our self-worth into our careers. And that actually has some costs associated with it. And so not always being the person in the room who's the smartest or with the answer, not always, I mean, speaking up, I think young women need to speak up, but sometimes I've learned, occasionally the hard way, that holding off a minute, sitting, watching, understanding what's really going on. And because a lot of times, even in a simple meeting, there's a lot of complex dynamics that are all going on at once. And that extra minute or 2 to digest what's really going on can be really helpful. So I think patience in your everyday, as well as patience in the long term.
It's something like being intentional. Yeah. It's like being intentional, knowing what's going on, what is the impact that you want to have, what are I'm going beyond what you said, but what are the relationships that you want to be cultivating? So there's some intention there, maybe strategic, as opposed to just pushing and.
Right. No, that's exactly right. I think that's a word. It's funny, we haven't spoken about this, but intention and deliberateness are 2 things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and trying to help people understand. And we're all working so fast. We're on our phones. You know, we've got to go quickly. We have to get all these things done. But you know, stopping and thinking about how the receiver of the information is going to receive that information, is as important as, you know, the making it as perfect as it can when you send it. And I think being intentional in our communications is and in our approaches is something we feel like we don't, that it just takes up time. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to stop and reread what I wrote and wonder whether or not the person on the other end, who might come from a different culture, a different world perspective, or a different language, or a different, you know, feeling about the error or the issue at hand. I'm just going to say what I have to say because it's important. Well, I've seen a lot of small problems become really big problems because we aren't intentional in what we're trying to do, because we're in a hurry.
Right. We're trying to get things done and move things along. And
right.
I was wondering, in my mind, I just thought, I wonder if email has made that worse, but we don't have to go there.
Technology, I think, has had both its positives and our negatives, but
how do you take time to be reflective, to take time and reflect and know what you're thinking and where you want to go? And how do you structure that in your life or your day or your month?
That's a good question. Because I think it's really, time is precious and hard to find, but you do have to take care of yourself, and you do have to find those moments where you can reflect on all kinds of things. So I think that it's absolutely critical. I travel quite a bit. And I don't, even if I'm allowed to, I feel, as with working for a nonprofit, I don't fly business class. So as a result, I often try to get somewhere a day early and use that time. I'm alone, I'm in a hotel, I'm somewhere, I'm out of my regular element to sit down and reflect. So I use a lot of my travel time to do a lot of reflection. I really, this is easier now. I no longer have young children, but I do try to use the weekend to really, there's times we have to work on the weekend. It's just the reality of deadlines and clients, but I really work hard to have that work-life balance so that I can create that space and hopefully that space for the teams that work for us to what I used to, you know, you'd easily, when particularly when my kids were younger, they'd go to bed at 8 o'clock, and you'd easily get an email from me between 10 and 2 in the morning, you know, for many, many, many years. And now I intentionally don't do that, because as a leader, I also want to model behavior. And I think that people need to see me taking some time to sit down and reflect or do something other, to kind of find your center a little.
And what is the benefit to you for reflecting? Why? So what? Why would anybody? Why do you do it? Why would you want anybody to do it? Does it matter?
I mean, I think it's about finding your center and what's important. You know, one of the things, unfortunately, I do a lot of reflection in the middle of the night. But one of the things that's changed over time is when I worry about things, what keeps me up at night, if you will, I've learned that. And unfortunately, I've learned it the hard way, because I've spent way too much time worrying about things that I can't change, things that I can't have an impact on. That no matter what happens, I can't change this circumstance. And so I use the time that I reflect and the time that I'm thinking to really try to, with some quiet, break down a problem that I'm having or a solution I'm trying to come up with. But there's just noise all of the time at work. I'm in meeting after meeting. You really have to carve out some time. I try to do it. I try to carve some time out on my calendar. I come to work. I get to work hopefully before 8. So between 8 and 9, very few meetings occur, and I can come in, get myself ready for the day. And but I think it's important to force that time as you can.
I've been thinking that this is I'm going to call it a resource that's being underutilized. So it's just a new thing I've been thinking about, that people aren't taking enough time to just reflect and think and know what they think and where they're going. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious on how you manage it.
Yeah.
Planes are great for that.
Yes, they are. I should catch up more on movies, but I tend to actually not do that at all on a plane. I usually just sit and think.
Um, what are some other things that we would like to talk about? What are some challenges for women as leaders? Do you see any particular challenges that are specific for women?
Um, Certainly. I mean, I think we still have to figure out, you know, in the industry I work in the international NGO industry, there actually are a lot of women leaders, and there are a lot of, although there's still a far too few in the C-suite. But I think first of all, we struggle with issues of pay parity. I think that's one that we struggle both for ourselves as leaders, but also making sure that our organizations are committed to pay parity. But I think that's a big, broad issue. I think lack of confidence is one that can be at all levels. But am I good enough? Am I making the right decisions? And if I make and you know, some of the things that I talked about earlier maybe seem like very, you know, soft issues, you know, vulnerability, forgiveness, and how does a hard driving CEO or CFO or whomever else, how will they react to those things? So figuring out what your voice is and how you can have an impact, for sure. I mean, we talk about the double bind a lot, and how women are impacted. Well, a man is considered strategic, but a woman is considered, you know, cunning, you know, and all of those things, unfortunately, still exist.
So in your own life, how have you maneuvered that then? Because you're an assertive woman, and you must have had to figure out how to be seen as collaborative and not the bossy word.
Right, right. um, I think I think it takes time. I think it takes time because you have to have room for some mistakes, and you realize, wow, I was way too hard driving on that one, and then this one, wow, I didn't demonstrate quite enough confidence. You know, for me, it's about getting feedback and asking people and talking to people. You know, some people, and it's actually been very effective for me at various times of my career, have realized that, you know, getting a coach, for example, is a really useful way of grounding yourself and your ideas, and how are you navigating these things. Getting a mentor is another one. But you know, to me, it's about, even though it sometimes can be very hard, it's about seeking authentic feedback, and being able to sit back and reflect on how, you know, and to be listening carefully to what others are telling you. But it's not easy.
Because it's a little bit of a conundrum in that the skills of you said new leadership are so are many traits that are usually thought of as women's, you know,
Right.
being vulnerable, well, not transparency, the yes. So then where my mind goes is if we're bringing these skills, if women are bringing, or men are bringing these skills, and they're not seen as leadership material because that's not the stereotype of the mold.
Mm-hmm.
And so then so I was thinking about that, and then what I hear you saying, if I'm following you, is then having your coach or mentor getting feedback, so how you can use those skills in a way that's effective. So there's the tension between having these great leadership skills and having them be effective in a way that other people think they're effective. Does that make any sense at all?
No, yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I think it's I think it's about I think some of those things that I've spoken about. I think that the traits that are considered, you know, female traits, those soft traits. If you're a leader and you're utilizing those traits, you aren't just a leader in your position. You're a leader by example.
Mm.
And you know what, one of the many difficult things for me, is interesting to watch it evolve, was how when I became when I grew in my career and I had a higher position, there were some circumstances where I realized, wow, people are listening to me. There was a story I tell. It was actually you know, middle of my career, where I was in a meeting, and we were doing actually making a very difficult decision. It was a cross-departmental group. I was actually probably one of the more junior ones, and I didn't agree with we hadn't developed principles upon which to make the decision. We were just throwing out ideas. So I tried to say, well, you know, let's figure out what those factors are. And in order to do that, I think if we all went back, or we had a couple of people go back and put together just a short study, not too much, but to come out with these things, then we would have an easier way of making a decision. Meeting went on and whatever. And about 3 weeks later, 2 people came into my office and they go, here it is. And I said, well, thanks, but what is that? And they said, well, we were in that meeting 3 weeks ago and you said we should put together a short study so we could come up with the factors and the principles upon which to make a decision. So here it is. And I was dumbfounded, because I had no authority whatsoever in that meeting to do that. I was just suggesting it. But, you know, then I realized, wow, people are listening. And I, you know, that's happened a couple of times, because you have to learn to be careful what you say, because then all of a sudden you say something and people do it. And so if we're talking about how you deal with these issues as a leader, it's been my experience, and sometimes a tough one, to realize people are watching, and there are times where I think I'm whispering, and people think people hear me yelling, and so I think leadership is a responsibility for understanding that people are watching, and you need to operate and treat others the way you want them to treat each other. Does that make sense? That was a long answer.
I mean, it's again, you know, you're always having to think, again, it's being intentional. Am I having the impact I want to have? Am I modeling what I want other people to do?
Right.
It's self-management, being observing. You can't go to sleep for too long and not pay attention to what you're doing.
Right.
And then the other thing, a little bit that you said ago that I wanted to circle back to, is you said people need to have self-confidence, which, yes, of course. And like, what's the magic bullet for that? Or the magic wand?
That's really hard. Yeah. And I think it does link back to what I was saying, you know, earlier. If you forgive failure and you accept that the most important part of failure is how you react and you recover, and you kind of lighten up a little bit on yourself and others. And when somebody, when somebody makes a mistake, somebody will, recently happened. Oh, Sylvia, I'm sorry. I said, I don't accept your apology. You do not need to say you're sorry. These things happen. What are we going to do? How do we figure this out? And so I think it's about giving yourself a little bit of leeway and trying to accept that if you are authentic and hardworking and forgiving, and if you demonstrate, mindfulness and humility, you'd be surprised that I don't have all the answers. In fact, I have very few. I couldn't do my job if it weren't for all the other smart people here who do their jobs. So confidence it's a really tough one. But it's a cultural change in some ways, even in an organization.
I love though what you said, and when you said it seemed so evident to me, which is forgiving mistakes, your own and others, being authentic, all of that though, that's I think would go so far in growing ours and others' confidence.
Well, I think if you have the privilege of earning people's trust, and I think it's really important. Trust is not ever granted. Authentic, true trust in somebody. It is earned, and it takes a long time. It takes patience. It takes deliberateness. But if you earn somebody's trust as a colleague, but also as a leader, you don't have to walk around being overconfident. You can say, I have that trust, so I can show that I either made a mistake, or I don't quite know what to do, or I need some advice, or how can we do this collectively? So I think trust is really at the core. I think that, a culture of forgiveness and transparency breeds trust, and that is, I think my biggest job is, how do I, the thing that keeps me up at night isn't a problem that's a technical fix. Very rarely a technical fix will keep me up at night. It's about how do I get a team who's having a problem or a conflict see each other's point of view, with empathy, with how do I guide change management? How do I help people overcome conflict and, manage the culture? It's absolutely true, the old adage that that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's just absolutely, there's no question in my mind. And so I think that what keeps me up at night is how to deliberately build a culture of respect, resilience, empathy, collective responsibility for where we're going in an organization. And so that's what I think.
And have you figured it out, or is this
No.
Grace will talk to you, we'll pick up with you and see what you've learned?
No, I think it's ever evolving. There's no true answer, because the strategies and the conflicts and the issues and the changes, we're in a fast-paced world that changes all the time. So I think that's just the challenge of leadership. And either you get exhilarated by it and knowing that, what worked to solve a solution in one organization isn't going to work in almost any other organization. I mean, certainly you learn and you bring pieces together from collective experiences in your life, but it's going to be constantly a moving target, which is why you need to get some sleep on airplanes and other things.
Another interview I did, the CEO told me, she said, one mistake I made was I thought that I fixed that problem, and next time I see that problem, I'll know how to fix it. And she said, it's leadership is evolving. She said, it's never, you always, every problem is like, what? Okay, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Never cookie cutter. So
no, it's not.
Anything that we haven't talked about that you hope that we would? Anything else you want to touch on?
No, I really appreciate, talking with you, and I really just appreciate that the intentionality that so many of us are trying to focus on leadership. I would just say that, finding a support network and system is absolutely critical. And I had the privilege to be part of a small group of women who were at a conference, and we realized it was, I don't know, it was almost exclusively CEOs, but there were a few other C-suite people in there, and realized, wow, we have a lot of questions, and let's create a WhatsApp group. And it's been fascinating. People, very senior executives in our industry who you think have the answers to everything, sending out an email blast to this other group and saying, hey, I had a problem at work today. Have any of you ever confronted this issue with the board? And does anybody have any resources? And the past month alone, there have been 4 or 5 CEOs. One came out and said, hey, lady CEOs, I have decided to renegotiate my salary with my board, and I'm a little nervous. Does anybody have any tools for me? And it was really exciting to find the support network. And there are lots of other support networks, whether they be your peers, people in other organizations, former colleagues. I think in the end, you can't do it alone, and getting that feedback from and support is critical. Certainly has been fundamental to me. And I can't be anything but so hugely appreciative of the people who've taken the time and energy to give me feedback and mentorship.
I love the WhatsApp group. I love knowing that's happening. And you had said to me at one point, you got to create your board. Create your board. You will bring together, and when you have a big issue, that you check with them. That's what you,
yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I like that. And it's not a sign, again, not a sign of weakness, as some people we might have made up, that having to ask for help is not a sign of weakness.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the interview, for your time, for your insight.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.